The two categories of zones that I have are forward lookup zones and reverse lookup zones. Forward lookup zones resolve names to IP addresses. Now that's created by default. When you install Active Directory and DNS gets installed and configured, it automatically creates some forward lookup zones for you. We'll see those in the interface in a moment. Reverse lookup zones are manually created. They resolve IP addresses to names. Within each of these lookup zones, we have 4 types of zones that we create. So these are just the broad categories of the zones. The actual zone types themselves are Active Directory integrated zones, which are hosted on domain controllers. If you are not a domain controller, you cannot host an Active Directory integrated zone. The reason that's a requirement is because that zone replicates with Active Directory. So the same way your users, computers, and groups replicate, all the records in that zone replicate through the same process. I can also have a primary zone. A primary zone is a read and write copy of a zone. All the records in a primary zone can be fully managed. Going hand in hand with a primary zone is a secondary zone. A secondary zone is simply a read-only copy of a primary. The main reason you would use a secondary zone is if you have a branch office. You don't want users from your branch office to resolve everything by name by crossing a WAN link to connect to your primary DNS server. So what you would do is you would deploy a secondary DNS server with that secondary zone. Users in that location would simply query that server, but it holds a read-only copy. Effectively, it's a distribution point. I make a change on the primary, that change is then written out to a secondary. The fourth zone type is a stub zone. The only records on a stub zone are records used to locate other DNS servers. An example of when I would use a stub zone: if I'm in a forest that has multiple domains, I want to have name resolution for another domain. I don't want to have every record from the other domain replicate to me. If I hosted an Active Directory integrated zone for, say, a child domain in the forest, that would mean every record in that zone would get replicated to me, and then it would stay up to date through replication. Well, this other domain may have thousands of records in it. I don't want that content. A secondary zone, you would have the same problem. A secondary zone is a full copy of a zone, and then it stays up to date. A stub zone will say, for this child domain, I'm not going to store all the records for all the computers in it. What I'm going to store is the records for the DNS servers. So now any query this DNS server receives that needs to resolve a name in the child domain, it simply forwards that to one of the DNS servers located in the stub zone. So there are no transfers, there's no replication, but you still have full name resolution throughout your forest. Of these zone types, Active Directory integrated is the most common and the preferred. Now let's look at these in great detail in the interface.